It is 8:30, and I am so impressed you guys are all here. And your eyes are open. This is great. We're going to get started. My name is Jim Montgomery. Today we're going to talk about some IGA stuff. Mostly I'm going to be complaining for the next 20 minutes, so I apologize right now. Everything is perfect from far away. This is a lyric from a band that I really like called Postal Service. They made one album, and they've been touring for, actually they did a 20th anniversary tour here recently, and my wife and I went. It was really good. But this song is kind of about how, obviously from far away, things look great and they're easy. It's when you get up close that things become disgusting and broken and hard. And I like to focus on those hard things that are risky and difficult, because if we fix them, that makes life better for all of us going forward. So the idea here with this presentation is to talk about some things that are hard and difficult with IGA programs, with governance programs, and have a bit of a discussion about how do we think differently about them, and is there anything that we could have software vendors help us with, because there's a lot of things about governance that we don't do with software, right? We have these tools that we purchase and we think, hey, this will be great. I've got a tool that's going to fix all my problems. Well, it turns out a big portion of what we do with governance isn't actually fixed with software yet. So that's what we're going to talk about. So my name is Jim Montgomery. I am the IGA practice lead at Trivir. I've spent the last decade or so thinking about how do we make IGA programs for our clients really successful. And we have a lot of really large clients, and we've had some success, but there's definitely some problems. And like I said, I'll just be complaining here. So the first portion of things that we're going to talk about are things that are hard, but hopefully there's some good ideas here. And some things that when you are on the plane later today going home, you'll be like, wait a minute, that was pretty cool actually. Maybe we can apply that. And if I do this correctly, you will have your socks blown off by this presentation. You'll have so many great ideas. And if that happens, don't worry, we have socks in the back of the room to provide to you. No joke. The guy in the green shirt back there will hand out socks if you don't have enough socks. So number one, the biggest problem or challenge that I talk to clients about is that governance as a program is not an IT challenge, it's a business challenge. And that's because most of what we do in an IG program has to do with policy and process and talking about how to transform the business in terms of reviews and requests. It is not an IT problem. Anymore. This wasn't true, 10 or 15 years ago, where it's like, hey, getting data into our tool, that's really difficult. That's become a lot easier these days with some great vendors that we've got. When we are deploying identity governance, what we want to do is maintain this idea that we're providing a service to the business. We're not going to do governance for the business. We need to provide a service for them so that app owners can have ownership of their own application. We want the app owners to be enabled so that they can do their own governance. Something that's really tricky is making sure that app owners who, again, we want them to be responsible for their own apps. It's important to make sure that they have a good, clear understanding of what the policy and process and procedures are that they're supposed to be following. And that, I'm not somebody who's going to want to try and force them to do it. I'm somebody who wants to engage with them and give them the tools that they might need that will help them. We want to lead them there. It's part of the service that we want to provide is, hey, how can we make application owners more responsible and understand the problem of what governance is? So ultimately, we want to share the load. It's not an IT problem. We want to make sure that the service we provide is enabling the business. When you are talking to business folks, there's a lot of different stakeholders, obviously, and they all have different pain. We need to address that. Therefore, there's different value propositions that you normally want to talk to them about, and ultimately that leads to a certain set of deliverables that you want to promise to those stakeholders. These are specific things that are scoped, right? And we're not saying, hey, we're going to fix all your problems immediately. We need to figure out what some of those specific deliverables are to individual stakeholders. And that includes app owners, it includes C-level executives, it includes your leadership team. We need to address all of their problems individually, because there's a lot of problems, it turns out, with governance. At this point, I need to tell you two important things. One is that the images in this presentation were all generated by AI. So when you see misspelled words, it's not because I'm an idiot. You shouldn't be laughing that hard. The second thing is that all the rest of the content, the words, I generated these using something that I think is going to be the next generation of AI. I like to call it, it's not artificial intelligence, it's superficial intelligence. So that's where all the rest of this content comes from. So this is where the title of this slide comes, or of this presentation comes from, this idea of permission lifecycle. Has anybody here heard of identity lifecycle? And everybody says yes, of course. Right? We talk about that all day, all long, right? Joiners and movers and leavers, et cetera. Permission lifecycle is this completely valid and parallel way of thinking about access management inside an organization. If you were to consider the life cycle of a permission, right? Permissions are introduced to a business when new applications are brought on board. They might be introduced when somebody creates a new group inside your AD environment. They change over time. They're granted extra rights. They might be nested inside other groups. The name and description of them should be updated periodically. They should get terminated like users eventually, right? There's a point where permissions aren't needed anymore. In any governance program, there should be some focus on permission lifecycle. It's a process that businesses need to consider. Application owners should have some procedures about, hey, how do we review our permissions periodically? Permissions are interesting from a governance standpoint because most of governance has to do with the relationship between accounts and permissions, or identities and permissions, where permission lifecycle is more about, nope, we need to ensure that our permission objects have the right set of metadata, because it's the metadata like who is the owner, what's the description, does it have a good name that makes sense and conveys what it does back to the business. That type of information is how you bridge the gap from, let's say, legacy permission management involves IT folks figuring out, like, how do we grant rights and give access to people, right? What we need to do in a mature environment doing governance is figure out good ways to grant or to enable the business to understand what permissions mean, and that's through the metadata that we generate and maintain over time. And this is something, again, part of the service. We want to make sure that application owners are able to, they have a process, and we want to help enable them to do this. I don't think there's a whole lot of software available today in the IGA market that does this really well. I think you could cobble together something, but it's never called out anywhere. This is an important process. This is something I would love to see more of. So I mentioned nested permissions. This is a really neat idea. Does anybody here manage groups in like Active Directory? Probably everybody's seen groups, sure. As a former AD admin, I like to think of groups from an AD mindset. You think of the group that holds the other group as the parent, and then the child is the group that is inside another group, right? And this is how you can grant permissions to a lot of people in a managed way. Number one use case when we do a POC for governance is, hey, just show me everybody who has domain admins access. And that's not inherently difficult at all. What becomes difficult is when you start considering how do we fulfill a change or a revocation to access. And so when you start considering fulfillment, the relationship between these two groups, it needs to change. And it's because if you do a review of these two groups, and someone is part of a nested group, and they've been granted access into domain admins, if they say, yeah, this person shouldn't have domain admin access anymore, where do you change that? This is a problem. You don't change it inside domain admins, probably. That would involve removing this other group from that. What you probably are going to end up doing is changing the membership of this comp admins group, the nested group, right? And so really, what are you reviewing? Are you reviewing the domain admins membership, or are you reviewing this nested group? And so it's useful to think about the parent-child relationship in reverse when you start thinking about reviews and fulfillment, because the parent group is the one that is the first relationship with the user object, And then secondarily, they might be getting access through nested group memberships, but those are downstream. Those are not the things that we're actually reviewing. So this is a neat idea. I'll just say that that's just a neat idea. Hope you agree. All right, we're going to talk about a bunch of things that I don't think there's good ways to deal with the rest of these things that we're going to talk about today with software. And so, to be honest, this is a bit of a love letter to all of you IGA practitioner folks and hopefully some vendors. I'm looking at some of you guys. Please fix these things. Please help with software. These are things that we know how to do this. It's process. We have to do it manually. It's very expensive and hard. So we mentioned that the challenge, it's not an IT challenge, right? It's a business challenge. That's because we don't have software that can fix all these things. In the next set of slides, we're going to go through a lot of these points specifically. And most of these are things that software doesn't necessarily help with today, right? Software is great for the review portion, the heavy lift, collecting data, let's do some reviews. There's tons more things that are really important. I was listening to a podcast about product management a few months ago. And when I heard this, I swear a tear came to my eye because I'm like, this is exactly the problem that I have with governance. I don't want to be consumed and overwhelmed by the solution that we're deploying, right? The software and the technology. I want to think more about what the problem is. And this is kind of the gut or the whole reason of this whole presentation is let's focus on some of these hard things. I love this quote. Don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. So number one, when you've collected all your data, you're doing some reviews, and the auditor's like, well, that's nice, but can you prove to us that you have a complete and accurate set of data that you've reviewed? It's like, well, what do you mean? We sucked it into our tool. Do you want to see how the tool works? And they're like, no, I want you to prove that it's complete and accurate set of data that you've collected. And so that's a process, it turns out, or a procedure for application owners, because it's probably going to be a slightly different process for each app owner to figure out, wait, did we get all the right stuff? Are we reviewing everything or a subset? And that's independent, up to the app owners to decide how they want to do that. Of course, they need to be in compliance with the policy that the organization sets, but figuring out how to do completeness and accuracy checks, that's something to consider. And again, I don't think software fixes this in a super easy way. Data cleanliness. I don't know if you guys have done a deployment and you suddenly realize, wow, our stuff is not as awesome as we thought it was. We might need to go through a couple phases here of just cleaning data. Does IGA tools help with that? Not a little, maybe. Are they great at it? I don't think so. I think that's something that we could do more of, right? Everybody complains onboarding is hard. I think there's been a lot of work to try and improve onboarding with a lot of applications here, a lot of IGA tools in the market. So it's getting less hard, but it's still always going to be hard. And of course, that's a little bit more of an IT problem than a business problem. A giant issue is we have too many permissions. There's too much access. If you think 20 years ago, you maybe had, 20, 30, 50 accounts. Today, you have hundreds of accounts. What the heck? That's terrible. It's a problem. I like to think of this as the proliferation of data and systems inside of our environment, right? It's just exploded and no one's been managing it, right? This is why when you set up an IGA program, you're like, whoa, this is actually really hard. There's a lot of stuff. The scale of what we're dealing with is a problem from a couple of ways, right? We have to consume it and generate reviews and figure out how to do that. But also when it comes time to review, you realize, hold on a second. I just assigned 50,000 items for this guy to review in 2 weeks. That's not going to work, right? Everybody talks about fatigue and problems of, hey, our reviewers are sick of this. There's a couple ways that we've seen to solve that, like just don't review everything. Do a subset. Just do the riskiest stuff. That's interesting to me. And if your policy supports that, and really what I'm saying is maybe you should change your policy to fit how you should do reviews. Maybe just review the riskiest things. That's a really interesting idea. There, I said, see, all these interesting ideas. So don't forget, we have socks for you in case they're knocked off. Yeah, so you can't review thousands of things. That's impossible. So we got to find ways to fix that. Another strategy is to use roles and try and combine things into smaller groups or sets of groups of permissions, right? And that, of course, is part of that permission lifecycle of figuring out, okay, how do we combine things together, assign them to a business task or a job code type of thing, and then we can potentially assign them automatically, right? We can do some attribute-based role assignment. That's interesting. And if it's pre-approved by business where they say, hey, Finance 1 gets these 400 different permissions, great, you don't even have to review that as part of the normal review process. You do that ahead of time as part of a separate permission lifecycle process. So that's interesting. That's a good way to reduce the burden. That is an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah, risk scoring. Yeah, we talked about that. We'll move on. So other process things. Yeah, we talked about you need to engage with your application owners, make sure you have a permission lifecycle. An interesting thing I heard of one customer doing is normally from a request standpoint, when you are granting permissions through your IGA tool, this is normally like a second or third phase type of thing. You don't go in and start immediately turning on request capability normally. Instead of having the entire business have the capability to request things, it's a really interesting idea just to delegate or designate a specific user who's an expert in what those permissions mean, and then your whole department would go talk to that person like, hey, I need access to these 40 things, can you go do that for me? And so it's not an IT person that you're delegating to, it's still a business person, but you're kind of focusing training and expertise into one spot. I think that's an interesting idea. Has anybody ever crafted hundreds of screenshots to prove that the audit in your review worked correctly? No one should be doing this anymore. Stop doing that. Our IGA tools should be able to generate a report and an artifact, a PDF that says, hey, the review went well. Here's review details of what the decisions were that were made. And here is an artifact that shows any changes or revocations were fulfilled. And if you complete those two things, then when they ask you to make screenshots, you kick them in the knee and you tell them, we don't need to do that. Here, look at these PDFs. I'm joking. You obviously want to love your compliance people and show them that you care, but also get them on board with using artifacts instead of screenshots, because no one needs to do screenshots anymore. Metrics. I absolutely am in love with metrics, because this is a really good way to sell the IGA program internally. There's a couple of types of metrics that we usually think about. There's the ones that come out of the IGA tool just showing, hey, system health, the tool is working. We have this many reviews and this many people haven't done them yet, et cetera. And that's great, those help. There are metrics that you probably can't get from the tool that are going to show that your process is working. And again, the tool is doing this much. The governance process is this much when you start talking about onboarding and how do we, all of the things. And so you want to generate metrics to show that the processes that you have are working in addition to what's inside the tool. And then lastly, there are program type of metrics that you will deliver to your leadership folks that show things that let them make strategic decisions like, are we using roles enough? Do we have exceptional access in a certain set of applications? Are there things that we can focus on? How risky are our users in general? Do they have excessive permissions? There's all kind of interesting things that are available from some of those type of metrics. And the IG tool will help generate some of those, but it's worth a good conversation to sit down with some executives and trying to understand, what do you want to learn from this really interesting data set that you have built from all of the application access inside your environment? I think that is a super valid or super interesting place to get metrics from. And that's it. So in summary, all these things are terrible. I would like to see the more software address some of these things inside our environments. If we focus on the hard stuff, it's going to make it all easier for us going forward. And that's it. Any questions that are interesting for everyone in the room? All right. Well, I thank you guys. Yeah, let's hear it.
Vendors who produce government tools and electronic auditors who come in and say, hey, I've got to have screenshots.
Yeah.
Why is it my job to educate the auditor to talk to the artifact of can these two people ever talk?
Yeah, they should. Yeah, I'm a big fan of having a it's going to sound weird, it's a governance board for your governance program where you bring together compliance folks, leadership, stakeholders like application owners potentially, and the IT group who's doing the implementation, bring them all together and talk regularly about things like, wait a minute guys, how long should we be retaining our data? And how long, what's the requirements from a standards and regulation standpoint? What are we trying to meet? Let's understand that first, make sure that the artifacts that we generate are doing all the right stuff. And hopefully if you invite them to the table and have those discussions, compliance folks and auditors want to talk about that stuff, and I kind of feel like they get beat up quite a bit because like app owners don't really listen to them all the time, but they're still important, and we're really enabling them quite a bit to have a longer, more engaging conversation with compliance between the app owners and compliance folks by providing a tool and a service that helps them do what everyone knows that they need to. So I totally agree. Yes, sir.
So one of the things we're struggling with is we're trying to get out of role-based access because we end up with twice as many roles as we have people.
Yeah.
And moving to more attribute-based access controls, policy-based
Yeah.
access control. Everybody loves it except the auditors. Have you come up with any strategies? They love seeing your ability to give them an active directory group and
Yeah.
say, here's the membership list.
Yeah.
Now I have to go, well, here's a report at this particular point in time of the people who meet the policy.
Yeah.
So now you can't recertify everybody's individual access, which we think is great.
Totally agree.
But now somebody has to recertify the policy, and
Yeah.
they don't really like that. And we're struggling to come up with an argument that resonates with them that allows us to continue going down that path.
I think this is all a question of what is the process that we want to follow to manage our permissions in place. And I think policy or attribute-based role assignment is awesome because you can extract from a normal regular review that you would do where you have to look at all the permissions of everybody into a separate process and have the appropriate authorized reviewers, that's a key word that auditors love, review those policies up front beforehand, and usually yearly. You probably need to review, and again, this is like permission lifecycle stuff, you need to manage those permissions at a cadence, maybe yearly. The permission review for exceptional access then is very small and there's nothing left. In my opinion, it should be a reasonable conversation with most auditors to say like, hey, we're going to review all this stuff and make sure that our permissions are right, and that's over here, and then separately let's do a review of any exceptional stuff that doesn't fall underneath the policy rules. Maybe you need to like trick them somehow, like with candy. I don't know. I don't know how else you would convince them.
That sounds like a great plan.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, bring them some socks, perhaps. Yes, ma'am.
So along those same lines, we ran into a problem. We had roles and we were putting multiple permissions from different applications.
Yeah.
SAP, a manufacturing system, and it was very well taken by our end users. They loved it, one stop. But then compliance time came around and it was happening at the application level.
Yeah.
So the application owner might say, no, this person shouldn't have this particular
Yeah.
application role, but they'd gotten it bundled with these other things.
Yep.
And it became a nightmare.
Yeah, I imagine.
Pulled them all apart and for now, until we could regroup and figure out how we wanted to do it.
Keep trying. That is really important. I think what you had built is 100% valuable, and that makes it a better experience for the end user, makes it easier to review, it makes it better for the business, everybody's happy, except the auditors. So I think you got to work and improve the performance or improve the process a little bit more and make sure that the right stakeholders are reviewing that role at a time and periodically. Because what you've described sounds beautiful. I can understand how different app owners are like, wait a minute, this is a problem. I will say role hierarchy management of like how do you build those, that gets really tricky because there is this bottom-up approach of you get all the access inside your system and you're doing this role mining usually from the bottom of what access is there versus what does the business think is the appropriate set of access, and those two things normally don't actually touch in the middle. And so it's a more conversation and work with the folks. There's not a technology way to solve this. It's a conversation, unfortunately, or fortunately, if you like talking to folks. Anything else? Good. We're done here. You guys are ready to move on to your next thing? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Don't forget your socks. If they've been blown off, then Darren back here has you covered. Thank you, guys.